September 17th, 1944. Eastern France. The field hospital wasn't supposed to run out of morphine. It wasn't supposed to run out of bandages. It wasn't supposed to run out of anything. But war doesn't care about what's supposed to happen. Corporal James Mitchell stood in the medical tent, looking at supplies that should have lasted a week, but were now nearly gone. 3 days. That's all it had taken. 3 days of constant casualties from the push toward the German border. Soldiers with shrapnel wounds, burns, compound fractures, injuries that required immediate surgery, and drugs the hospital no longer had. The supply convoy was delayed. No one knew when it would arrive. Could be tomorrow, could be 3 days, could be never, if the Germans hit the supply route like they'd been doing for the past week. Mitchell looked at the wounded men lying on cots that stretched the length of the tent. 40 of them, maybe more. Some sleeping, some staring at nothing. Some trying not to scream because screaming took energy they didn't have. And every single one of them needed medication the hospital didn't have anymore. Mitchell was a medic, not a doctor, not a surgeon, just a 23-year-old kid from Ohio who'd been trained to stabilize wounds and keep men alive until they could reach real medical care. But there was no real medical care. Not here. Not now. Just this tent. And him. And supplies that were running out faster than anyone had predicted. The chief medical officer, Major Carlson, stood beside him. Tired. Gray. Looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 3 days. "We need to triage," Carlson said quietly. Mitchell knew what that meant. Decide who gets treatment and who doesn't. Who lives and who dies. Not because they couldn't be saved, but because there weren't enough supplies to save everyone. Mitchell looked at the wounded again. 40 men. Maybe 8 doses of morphine left. Enough bandages for another day. Maybe. "There has to be another way," Mitchell said. Carlson shook his head. "There isn't. We do what we can with what we have. That's war." Mitchell was silent, because Carlson was right. That was war. Limited resources, impossible choices, and the understanding that sometimes doing your best still meant letting people die. But Mitchell had never been good at accepting impossible. He'd grown up on a farm where nothing came easy, where if the tractor broke, you fixed it yourself because there was no one else, where if the well ran dry, you dug deeper or found water somewhere else. You didn't give up. You found a way. Mitchell looked toward the tent entrance. Beyond it, in the fading light of dusk, he could see something that made an idea start forming in his mind. An idea that was completely against regulations, probably illegal, definitely dangerous, but possible. Maybe. What Mitchell didn't know yet, what he couldn't have predicted standing in that medical tent, surrounded by wounded men and dwindling supplies, was that the next 12 hours would force him to break every rule he'd been taught. Not because he was reckless, but because following the rules meant watching men die when he knew, absolutely knew, that he could save them. If he was willing to risk everything. The vehicle. He wasn't supposed to touch outside the medical tent. Parked near the perimeter sat a motorcycle. German. A BMW R75, black paint. Wehrmacht markings barely visible under layers of mud and dust. It had been captured 3 days earlier during a skirmish about 5 miles east. The Germans had abandoned it when their position was overrun. Fuel tank still half full. Engine intact. It ran. Mitchell had seen it earlier when a squad of infantry had rolled it into camp, laughing about their prize, taking turns sitting on it, posing for photographs like it was a trophy. Then they'd left it, moved on to other things, forgotten about it. But Mitchell hadn't forgotten, because he knew something most people in the camp didn't. 15 miles south, in a town called Epinal, there was a large supply depot. American. stocked with everything the field hospital needed. Morphine, bandages, antibiotics, surgical supplies. Enough to treat not just the 40 men in this tent, but hundreds more. The problem was getting there. The roads were dangerous. German patrols, artillery strikes, minefields. No one traveled those roads alone. Convoys only. And the next convoy wasn't scheduled for 2 days. 2 days. By then, half the men in the medical tent would be dead. Mitchell stood outside, staring at the motorcycle. He'd never ridden one before, never even sat on one. But he understood engines, tractors, trucks, farm equipment. How different could a motorcycle be? He walked closer, looked at it. The controls were labeled in German, but he could figure it out. Probably. Mitchell glanced back at the medical tent, at the men inside who were running out of time. Then he looked at the motorcycle again. He knew what he was thinking was insane. Stealing a captured enemy vehicle, riding 15 miles through hostile territory, alone, at night, with no authorization, no backup, no plan except get to the depot, load up supplies, and somehow make it back alive. If he got caught by his own command, court-martial. If he got caught by the Germans, dead. But if he didn't go, 40 men would die anyway. Mitchell made his decision the way he made most decisions, quickly, without overthinking. He walked to the motorcycle, checked the fuel, still half full. Enough to get there, maybe enough to get back. He found the ignition, kicked the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Loud. Too loud. Heads turned. Soldiers looked over. Mitchell didn't wait for anyone to ask questions. He twisted the throttle. The motorcycle lurched forward. He nearly fell off, caught himself, found his balance, and rode toward the perimeter gate. A guard stepped into his path. "Hey, where are you going with that?" Mitchell didn't slow down, just shouted over the engine noise. "Medical emergency! Opening the gate!" The guard hesitated, looked at Mitchell's medic armband, at the motorcycle. Then, maybe because he was confused, maybe because he didn't want to be responsible for delaying a medical run, he stepped aside. Mitchell rode through the gate, into the darkness, into territory where American forces barely had control, into a decision that would either save 40 lives or end his. What Mitchell didn't know yet, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that his unauthorized ride would become something else entirely. Not just a supply run, but a 12-hour journey that would force him to improvise, lie, steal, and make choices no medic's training had prepared him for. All because he believed something fundamental. That rules existed to save lives. And when following them meant losing lives, the rules stopped mattering. The road no one should take. The road south was darker than Mitchell had expected. No moon, heavy clouds overhead, just the narrow beam of the motorcycle's headlight cutting through the blackness. Trees on both sides. Dense. Close. The kind of forest where anything could be hiding. Mitchell kept the throttle steady. Not too fast. The road was damaged. Potholes, shell craters, debris from previous fighting. One wrong move and he'd crash, break a leg, or worse. And no one would find him until morning. If ever. He rode for 20 minutes, seeing nothing, hearing nothing except the motorcycle engine and his own breathing inside the helmet he'd grabbed from the captured German gear pile. Then, lights ahead. Mitchell slowed, his heart hammered. Could be American, could be German. No way to tell from this distance. He killed the headlight, let the motorcycle coast to a stop. Silence, except for his pulse pounding in his ears. The lights weren't moving. Stationary. A checkpoint, maybe. Or a patrol taking a break. Mitchell waited, watching. After a minute, he saw movement. Soldiers. But which side? He couldn't tell. If they were American, he could ride through. Explain the situation. probably get yelled at, but nothing worse. If they were German, he was dead. Mitchell had two choices: turn around, go back, abort the mission, or take a chance. Trust that whoever was up ahead would let him pass. He thought about the men in the medical tent, about Major Carlson preparing to decide who lived and who didn't, about the morphine that was almost gone. Mitchell started the engine again, flipped on the headlight, and rode toward the checkpoint. Slowly, hands visible on the handlebars, non-threatening. As he got closer, he saw the uniforms. American. Relief flooded through him. He pulled up to the checkpoint. Two soldiers stepped forward, rifles ready. Not aimed at him, but ready. "Identify yourself," one of them said. "Corporal James Mitchell, medic, Field Hospital, Grid 7-4. The soldier frowned. "What are you doing out here? Alone?" Mitchell had prepared an answer. Not the truth, but close enough. "Emergency supply run. We're out of morphine. Command authorized me to pick up supplies from Epinal Depot." It was a lie. Command hadn't authorized anything, but the soldier didn't know that. He looked at Mitchell's armband, at the motorcycle, then at his partner. "You got paperwork?" Mitchell's stomach dropped. Paperwork. Of course they'd ask for paperwork. He didn't have any. "Lost it," Mitchell said. Grabbed the bike and went. "Men are dying. Didn't have time." The soldier stared at him, suspicious. Mitchell kept his face neutral, calm, even though inside he was screaming. Finally, the soldier stepped back. "All right, but you're crazy riding out here alone. Germans hit this road 2 nights ago." "I'll be fast," Mitchell said. And he was. He twisted the throttle and rode past the checkpoint before they could change their minds. Into the darkness again, heart still pounding, but alive, and closer to the depot. What Mitchell didn't realize, what he wouldn't learn until later, was that his lie at the checkpoint had been recorded, logged, reported up the chain, and that even if he succeeded, even if he brought back the supplies, he'd still face consequences. But Mitchell wasn't thinking about consequences. He was thinking about the next checkpoint, and the one after that, and whether his luck would hold for 12 more miles. The depot that saved 40 lives. Mitchell reached the Epinal supply depot just after midnight. It was massive. Rows of warehouses, stacks of crates under tarps, trucks being loaded and unloaded even at this hour. Floodlights everywhere, guards at every entrance. Mitchell pulled up to the main gate, cut the engine. A guard approached. "State your business." Mitchell climbed off the motorcycle. His legs were shaking, not from fear, from the vibration of riding for 2 hours straight. "Corporal Mitchell, medic. I need to requisition medical supplies." The guard looked at him, at the German motorcycle. "That's a Wehrmacht bike. Captured equipment," Mitchell said. "Only thing available." The guard didn't look convinced. "You got authorization." Here it was again. The question Mitchell couldn't answer honestly. "Emergency situation," Mitchell said. "Field Hospital, Grid 7-4. We're completely out of morphine. 40 wounded. Need supplies immediately." "You got paperwork?" "No." The guard frowned. "Can't requisition supplies without paperwork." Mitchell felt his control slipping. "Men are dying. Right now. While we stand here talking about paperwork." "Rules are rules, Corporal." Mitchell stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Listen, I rode 15 miles through hostile territory on a captured enemy motorcycle because I don't have time for rules. Those men don't have time. You can either let me in, or you can explain to your CO tomorrow morning why 40 American soldiers died because you followed procedure." The guard stared at him, long enough that Mitchell thought he'd blown it. Then, "Wait here." The guard walked to the guard shack, made a phone call. Mitchell couldn't hear what was being said, just waited. Hands shaking now, from adrenaline, from exhaustion. from the realization that he'd come this far and might still fail. The guard came back. "Depot officer will see you. Follow me." Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Mitchell followed the guard through the gate, past rows of supply crates, to a small office where a lieutenant sat behind a desk covered in requisition forms. The lieutenant looked up. "You're the medic who rode here alone?" "Yes, sir." "On a German motorcycle?" "Yes, sir." The lieutenant leaned back. "That's either the bravest thing I've heard or the stupidest." "Probably both, sir." The lieutenant almost smiled. "What do you need?" Mitchell rattled off the list. Morphine, bandages, sulfa drugs, surgical sutures, everything the field hospital had run out of. The lieutenant wrote it down, then looked at Mitchell. "This is irregular. You know that." "Yes, sir." "You're going to face questions when you get back." "I know, sir." The lieutenant was quiet. Then he signed the requisition form. "Load up. But understand something, Corporal. What you did tonight, riding out here unauthorized, it's going in a report. You might have saved lives, but you still broke about a dozen regulations." "Understood, sir." "Good. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Mitchell loaded the supplies. 2 large medical packs, strapped to the motorcycle. Heavy. Almost too heavy. The bike sagged under the weight. But it would hold. Probably. Mitchell started the engine, looked back at the depot, at the lieutenant watching from the office window. Then he rode out. Back toward the field hospital. Back through the darkness. Back through territory where every shadow could be an enemy. But this time, Mitchell wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about 40 men who'd still be alive when he got back. What Mitchell didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until he returned, was that his unauthorized run had triggered something unexpected. Not punishment, but realization. That sometimes the people who save the most lives are the ones willing to ignore the rules that were supposed to save them. The ride back. The return journey was harder, not because of the distance, but because Mitchell was exhausted. He'd been awake for 20 hours, working a 12-hour shift at the hospital, then riding for 4 hours, then dealing with the stress of lying his way through checkpoints and depot guards. His hands were numb from gripping the handlebars. His back screamed from the awkward riding position. And the weight of the medical supplies made the motorcycle handle differently. Slower, less responsive, more dangerous on the damaged roads. Mitchell rode through the darkness, eyes burning, fighting to stay alert. Twice he nearly fell asleep, caught himself just before veering off the road. But he kept going, because stopping wasn't an option. Around 400, dawn started breaking, gray light filtering through the trees. Mitchell could see better now. The road ahead, the forest on both sides. But dawn also meant he was more visible, to patrols, to snipers, to anyone watching the roads. He passed the American checkpoint again, different guards this time. They waved him through without questions, probably saw the medical packs, assumed he was legitimate. 5 miles from the field hospital, Mitchell heard something that made his blood run cold. Engines, behind him, getting closer. He looked back. 2 vehicles, German Kubelwagens, scout cars, moving fast. Mitchell twisted the throttle. The motorcycle surged forward, but it was heavy, overloaded. The German vehicles were faster. They were gaining. Mitchell's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, not with this much weight. He could dump the supplies, lighten the load, maybe escape. But if he dumped the supplies, 40 men died. So that wasn't an option. He kept riding. Faster. Pushing the motorcycle to its limit. The forest blurred past. The German vehicles were maybe 200 yards back now. Closing. Then, gunfire. Bullets snapped through the air. Not close, but close enough. Mitchell leaned lower. made himself a smaller target, kept the throttle wide open. The road curved ahead. Sharp turn. Mitchell took it too fast. The motorcycle skidded, back wheel sliding. He fought for control, nearly lost it, but recovered. Kept going. The German vehicles took the curve slower, gave Mitchell a few extra seconds. Not many, but enough. Because ahead, through the trees, Mitchell saw something that might save him. An American patrol. 3 jeeps, moving north on the same road. Mitchell flashed his headlight. On. Off. On. Off. The lead jeep saw him. Slowed. Mitchell pulled up beside them, gasping. Germans! 200 yards back. The patrol didn't hesitate. The jeep spun around, mounted machine guns swiveling into position. "Get behind us!" the patrol leader shouted. Mitchell didn't need to be told twice. He pulled behind the jeeps, watched as they set up a quick defensive position. 30 seconds. Later, the German scout cars came around the curve. Saw the American patrol. Braked hard. Reversed. Disappeared back into the forest. The patrol leader walked over to Mitchell. "You all right?" Mitchell nodded, too wired to speak. "What are you doing out here alone?" "Supply run," Mitchell managed. "Medical." The patrol leader looked at the German motorcycle, at the medical packs, then at Mitchell. "You're either crazy or have the biggest balls in the army." Mitchell almost laughed. "Probably both. We'll escort you back. Where you headed?" "Field Hospital, Grid 7-4. "That's on our route. Let's move." The convoy, 3 jeeps and 1 German motorcycle, continued north. Mitchell rode behind them. Safe now. Protected. And for the first time in 6 hours, he let himself believe that he might actually pull this off. What Mitchell didn't know yet, what he'd find out in less than an hour, was that while he'd been gone, Major Carlson had been forced to make the decisions Mitchell had hoped to prevent. And not everyone had survived the night. The reckoning. Mitchell rode into the field hospital camp at 0600 hours, 6.5 hours after he'd left. The medical tent was exactly as he'd left it. Rows of wounded, exhausted medics, and Major Carlson standing near the entrance, looking 10 years older. Mitchell killed the engine, climbed off the motorcycle, nearly fell. His legs wouldn't hold him. He caught himself, started unstrapping the medical packs. Carlson walked over, stared at him. "Where the hell have you been?" "Epinal Depot, sir. Got the supplies we needed." Carlson looked at the packs, at the motorcycle, then back at Mitchell. "You stole a motorcycle and rode to Epinal, alone, unauthorized." "Yes, sir." "Do you have any idea how many regulations you broke?" "Several, sir." Carlson was silent for a long moment. Then, "How much morphine did you get?" 40 ampules, sir, plus bandages, sulfa drugs, sutures." Carlson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Bring it inside." Mitchell carried the packs into the medical tent. The other medics stopped what they were doing, stared. "Is that?" "Morphine," Mitchell said, "and everything else we need." For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos. Controlled chaos. Medics grabbing supplies, distributing them, administering doses to men who'd been waiting in agony for hours. Mitchell watched, too tired to help, too exhausted to do anything except stand there. One of the wounded, a private with a leg wound, looked at him. "You got more morphine?" Mitchell nodded. "Thank God," the private whispered, and closed his eyes. Carlson appeared beside Mitchell. "Come with me." Mitchell followed him outside the tent, away from the others. Carlson turned. "What you did was reckless, dangerous, and completely against orders." "Yes, sir." "Men could have died because you weren't here." "Yes, sir. But they didn't." Carlson paused. "Because you brought back supplies that saved their lives." Mitchell didn't respond, didn't know what to say. "I'm putting you on report," Carlson continued. "You'll face disciplinary action, probably lose rank, maybe worse." Understood, sir. But I'm also recommending you for a commendation. Because what you did, stupid as it was, saved 40 men. Mitchell blinked. Sir? You heard me. Now get some sleep. You look like hell. Carlson walked away. Mitchell stood there, trying to process what had just happened. He'd broken a dozen rules, stolen a vehicle, lied to multiple checkpoints, risked his life and the mission. And somehow, it had worked. One of the other medics, a corporal named Davis, came outside. Hey, Mitchell! Yeah? That thing you did, that was insane. I know. But thanks. Davis went back inside. Mitchell looked at the motorcycle, at the medical tent, at the men inside who were still alive because he'd refused to accept that there was nothing he could do. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and scared and relieved, but mostly tired. What Mitchell didn't know yet, what he wouldn't discover for weeks, was that his unauthorized run had started something. A conversation at higher command about emergency protocols, about empowering medics to make field decisions, about the difference between following rules and saving lives. Mitchell's actions would eventually lead to a new policy: Emergency Medical Acquisition Protocol. Medics in desperate situations could requisition supplies without prior authorization. It wasn't named after Mitchell. He never got credit for it. But every medic who used that protocol afterward, every life saved because someone had the authority to act immediately, owed their success to one corporal who'd stolen a motorcycle and ridden through hostile territory because he believed something fundamental. That saving lives mattered more than following rules. The cost of doing right. Mitchell slept for 16 hours, collapsed on a cot in the medic's quarters, and didn't move. When he woke, it was night again. The camp was quiet. He walked outside. His body ached. Every muscle protested. But he was alive. He walked to the medical tent, looked inside. Most of the wounded were sleeping now. The ones who'd been in agony the night before were finally at rest. Morphine working. Pain managed. Davis saw him, came outside. How you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, Mitchell said. Yeah, well, you kind of rode one through a war zone. They stood in silence. Then Davis said, You know they're court-martialing you? Mitchell nodded. Figured. Carlson tried to fight it. Said you saved lives. But command says you violated too many regs. Stole military equipment. Operated without authorization. Endangered yourself and the mission. They're not wrong, Mitchell said. But you saved 40 guys. Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. Davis shook his head. That's bullshit. Mitchell didn't disagree, but he also understood. The military ran on rules, on discipline, on following orders. If everyone did what Mitchell had done, if everyone ignored protocol whenever they thought they had a better idea, chaos. He got that. But he also knew that sometimes rules didn't account for reality, for situations where following procedure meant people died. The court-martial happened 2 weeks later. Mitchell stood in front of a panel of 3 officers. They read the charges: unauthorized use of captured equipment, operating outside assigned area, failure to follow supply protocol. Mitchell didn't deny any of it, just explained why. The officers listened, then deliberated. 20 minutes. They came back. Corporal Mitchell, you are found guilty of all charges. However, given the circumstances and the outcome, we are reducing your sentence to a formal reprimand and loss of 2 months' pay. Mitchell nodded. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Corporal. What you did was reckless, but it was also exactly what those men needed. Don't make a habit of it. No, sir. Mitchell walked out, reprimanded, fined, but still a medic, still able to do his job. And that was all he'd wanted. What Mitchell didn't know, what no one told him, was that Major Carlson had privately lobbied every officer he could reach to minimize Mitchell's punishment. That the three-officer panel had initially wanted a dishonorable discharge. That only Carlson's testimony, and the testimony of the 40 men Mitchell had helped save, had convinced them to show leniency. Mitchell never found out, and Carlson never told him, because that's not how the military worked. You did your job, you faced the consequences, and you moved on. The war continues. Mitchell stayed with the field hospital until the war ended, May 1945. Germany surrendered. The fighting stopped, and slowly, the wounded stopped coming. Mitchell went home to Ohio in August of that year. Back to the farm, back to the life he'd left 3 years earlier. He didn't talk about the war, didn't tell anyone about the motorcycle ride, about the supplies, about the 40 men. When people asked what he did, he just said, medic work, kept guys alive, and left it at that. He married a girl from town in 1947, had 3 kids, worked the farm, lived quietly. In 1952, he got a letter from Major Carlson. It was short. Mitchell, wanted you to know the Emergency Medical Acquisition Protocol went into effect last month. Medics can now requisition supplies in emergency situations without prior auth. Your ride might have had something to do with that. Stay well. Carlson. Mitchell read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer. Never mentioned it. Not to his wife, not to his kids, because it didn't matter if anyone knew. What mattered was that medics somewhere in the world could now do what he'd done, without facing a court-martial. That was enough. The rule that saved thousands. The Emergency Medical Acquisition Protocol is still in effect, 70 years later. It's been revised, updated, renamed. But the core principle remains. In emergency situations, medical personnel have the authority to acquire supplies through any means necessary, without waiting for approval, without lengthy authorization chains, because time in a medical emergency matters more than procedure. That protocol has saved thousands of lives. In Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Medics using that authority to requisition supplies, commandeer vehicles, make split-second decisions that keep people alive. None of them know where it came from. There's no mention in the training manuals of a corporal named Mitchell who stole a German motorcycle and rode through hostile territory because 40 men were going to die otherwise. But every life saved under that protocol exists because one medic decided that rules weren't absolute. That sometimes doing what was right meant breaking what was allowed. Mitchell never got a medal, never got recognition. The Army quietly buried his court-martial records after the war. He lived to be 78, died in 1999. His obituary mentioned his service as a medic, his farm, his family. Nothing about the ride, nothing about the protocol. But the protocol remains. And every medic who uses it proves something Mitchell understood back in 1944. That saving lives isn't about following orders. It's about understanding when the orders don't matter anymore. When the only thing that matters is the person in front of you who needs help right now. Mitchell broke the rules, got punished for it, and never regretted it. Not for a second. Because 40 men went home who wouldn't have otherwise. And that, Mitchell believed, was worth any punishment the Army could give. That's not heroism in the traditional sense. It's something quieter, more human. The understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept that nothing can be done.